this session on a very interesting topic, and this is a very important topic as well, tickets versus projects. So what's the difference between the two? When do you use each of these? And how do you use each of these to improve the profitability of your MSP? So that's going to be the discussion for today. And for this, we have with us Chris Timm. So Chris is someone who's very well known in the MSP space. He's a PSA expert. He's next MSP business owner and is now an independent consultant. And he's the author of the book PSA Profitability. So for anything PSA, Chris is the go-to person. So we're glad to have you for this session, Chris.
Hey, Saram, thanks very much for the intro.
Thank you. So yeah, before I hand it over to Chris, so if you've got any questions on the topic, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A box. We'll take them up towards the end of the session and answer them for you. Over to you, Chris.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Saram. So yeah, just to kind of cover off what was on the previous slide. My background is, as Saram said, I'm an ex-MSP business owner. I owned and managed an MSP business. I then sold that business and actually went to work at a large PSA vendor in the UK. Started up their technical team. So I started up the pre-sales and the post-sales and consulting team, and then started out as an independent consultant back in 2017. So I've been in and around the MSP industry for a long time, and I've seen people asking these kinds of questions almost on every single call that I do about, when should they use projects? When should they use tickets? Can they use one over the other? Can they use them both? So what I'm hopefully going to do is to dispel that myth today about, whether we can actually use both of them, whether we have to use one exclusively, or all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, if you want to just go to the next slide for me, please. Okay, so what I'm going to cover off is basically that, what is a ticket and when to use a ticket. At least in my opinion, this is what is a ticket and when to use it, and what is a project and when to use it. And then, kind of the use cases and, like I said, when do we use tickets? When do we use projects? And is there any time that we can actually use both, or, can we use just tickets or just projects? So hopefully I'm going to be able to cover a lot of that off today. Okay, so let's look at what is a ticket. So typically a ticket is designed for, remedial one-off work such as Outlook not working, a printer broken, repairing a computer, or could even be a small installation of software and hardware that is for a short amount of time. So, for example, you may actually have a PC installation or, setting up a router or a switch or something like that. And you could actually do that as a ticket. So, a ticket doesn't necessarily have to only be something that is, remedial one-off work like fixing Outlook, that kind of thing. What I've put there is tickets usually require one person to do the whole job. So if you think about, for example, a PC build, typically you're going to have the same person with the same skill set. He's going to be able to install, the operating system and Outlook and Word and all these other good things and all the bits of software and set up the networking. So typically one person can do it. And that's very often where a ticket comes into play. You do not need to necessarily, and I say the word necessarily, have a project for that. Because as I'll talk about later, you could actually have a project, to do something small like setting up a PC or workstation or whatever the case might be. But typical examples of when you would be using a ticket is, things that I've described over there. So, printer not working, Outlook not receiving email, Microsoft 365 install and setup. Can you go to the next slide for me, please? So let's look at what a project is. So a project is typically designed for longer term work. And this is something that's typically going to, span over multiple days, weeks, months, and usually would require multiple people with different skill sets. So now, if you noticed in the previous slide, I said, Microsoft 365 installation, and I've actually put a Microsoft 365 reset in here as well, because that could actually be a project or a ticket. It actually doesn't really matter. However, most of the time where a project is going to come into play is where, it usually requires more than one person to do the whole job. And those people have different skill sets. So, it could be things like setting up an entire infrastructure. You might have, cabling experts who are going to do the cabling side. You might have server experts who are going to set up the server side. You might have somebody that's going to build the server room, or, whatever the case might be, whatever it is that the project is, you're typically going to have lots of different people with different skill sets, and they're all going to be working either on all of those tasks at the same time. So you could have, somebody installing the switch at the same time as somebody that's setting up the server. Or they could be completely different times as well. So you could have somebody, maybe you have to have, something happening in specific, a specific sequence. So you might have to, in some instances, have a server set up before you can set the switch up, or before you can, do whatever else it is that you need to do on the project. And that's where projects typically come into play is, and so always remember that as a project usually, and I say here usually, require more than one person to do the whole job, and usually is led by a project manager. So that is typically what a project is, but we can actually interchange the two. So I've seen many people use tickets for an entire, network infrastructure project. So they've done a separate ticket for every single thing that needs to be done. One of the problems with doing that is that what you then typically end up finding is that you have hundreds of tickets all over the place, and they're very difficult to manage because they're not going to link together, all of those kinds of things. Whereas a project is very much of a structured, set of instructions that you do. You can view it all from one place. You can look at things like Gantt charts. You can schedule your staff. You can, see what's happening when. You can have, things like dependency tasks, that this task can't happen before that task. You typically couldn't do that with the tickets, but there's no reason why you couldn't actually do a project, do an entire project with a bunch of tickets. I'll just change to the next. So basically, this is what I was saying, that, tickets and projects can be interchangeable. There's no reason why you couldn't use tickets for projects. Work can start on a ticket and it can get converted into a project later. So I see this happen very often, where somebody will start something out maybe as a ticket because maybe you've got an opportunity and you've got some kind of pre-sales activity that you might want to do as a ticket. You might want to go and have a meeting with a customer, or, you might need to go and scope out their environment, that kind of thing. And that might start out as a ticket. And then later you either decide that you need to do it as a project, or, you still have a project actually set up off the back end of that, and you simply convert that ticket into a project task and then manage the whole thing as part of a project. So to answer the question about when should I use a project, when should I use a ticket, it doesn't actually matter, right? You can use projects and tickets completely interchangeable with each other. You can use them at any time. It is a lot more difficult, though, to manage a project as a bunch of different tickets than it is to manage it from a project management perspective. Now, when it comes to billing for the stuff is also when, using a project over a ticket comes into play. So for example, typically a ticket is going to be invoiced by the hour, or it's going to be invoiced as, as part of a managed services contract. Most PSA tools work in that way, that because it's remedial work and it's designed to do something very, fixing printers, looking at Outlook issues, whatever the case might be, it's designed at that point to just bill as part of a normal contract. Whereas a project is typically going to be billed as a fixed price. So you're going to go to your customer and say, okay, we're going to charge you $5,000, $10,000, whatever it is for this network infrastructure refresh. And then a project can be billed in milestones as well. So you can say, we'll take 20% upfront, and we'll take, another 20% halfway through, and we'll take the rest later. And typically tickets, even though you can use that kind of billing method for tickets if you really wanted to, typically tickets aren't really designed to bill like that. So if you have that that scenario where you're charging your customer a fixed fee up front, then that's probably something where you're going to need to have it actually done as an actual project in the PSA tool rather than doing it as a bunch of tickets. Does it make all sense? Does anyone have any questions? I know we're going to cover off a lot of questions at the end, but if there are any sort of questions or anything that anyone has, just, you know, fire them off in the Q&A.
Yes.
And
so yeah, the best question also wins 1 hour of consulting with Chris. So just start dropping the questions in. So yes.
Okay. And Saram, I know that you had a couple of questions. We sort of spoke offline, and I know you wanted to go through a couple of questions. So I wanted to just
yes, exactly, Chris. So yeah, I had a couple of questions in mind for this as well. So to start with, Chris, so what do you think is the best way to, you know, charge for projects? Is it to charge upfront, or is it to do milestone wise? What's the best way to go about doing that?
That's a great question, and there isn't a best way as such. I mean, I think it really depends upon you as an MSP. It depends on your customer. You know, I've seen a lot of people charge for the whole project up front. So they take the whole £10,000 up front. Great if you can get that, you know, great if you can get your customer to pay you £10,000 up front for the project. But 90% of the time, you know, people bill in milestones. Now, most of the time I see that being 3 milestones. So you'll take, you know, a percentage up front, and halfway through the project, you'll take another percentage, whatever that percentage may be. And then you normally take the rest at the end on completion. So that's the way most people bill projects. But I have also actually seen people bill projects by the hour as well. So, you know, and as I said earlier on, there is projects are designed to be billed as a fixed price, as a, you know, $5,000 or $10,000 for the project. But there's, you know, if you were doing a project using the project module or you know, the projects within the PSA to do a smaller job like install a PC or something like that, then maybe you would go down the hour, you know, bill it by the hour to set the thing up. But you typically wouldn't, you know, use hourly billing if you were going to do a network infrastructure project that was going to take 30, 40 days to do.
Got it. Yes. I've got 2 more questions as well, Chris, but before that, we also have a poll that's ready. So we'll just launch the poll. So launching the poll, and it's up on your screens now.
While people are doing that, there is actually a question that, or more statement actually in the chat. And, you know, he says projects for us, hardware upfront, 30% labor at signing, 30% at start, and 30% at sign off. Yeah, and I see that a lot, right? Is things like the hardware typically would be charged upfront. Now that could be part of your you know, initial milestone. So you could say, okay, you know, we're going to charge 30% of the labor and all of the hardware upfront. Some people have the milestone of just the hardware upfront, and then, you know, maybe 2 or 3, you know, days or weeks later, they might charge the milestone for the labor. It really does depend on you, but absolutely, I would say 100% of the time, charge hardware upfront. You know, especially if you have to buy that equipment, you certainly want to have your customers pay you for that straight away. I used to do that in my MSP business. We never supplied any hardware to any customer unless they paid for it upfront. Got it.
Yes. So yeah, so that also brings me now to the second question, Chris, a follow-up to the first one. So what do you think are the best practices to track the profitability of a project?
That's a great question. There's a number of ways to do that. So the first and most important thing is to make sure that you've got all of the costs in of, you know, all the hardware that you're selling, make sure that you've got the burden rates, the internal costs of your engineers, make sure that you have all of that information in, because that's going to then allow you to really report against the profitability of that project. So you're then going to be able to do, and most of the time it's very simple maths, how much money am I making and how much is it costing me? And that's going to give you your profitability figure. Now, also, that also includes putting in all of your expenses. So if you have to take a train or fly or stay in a hotel, you may need to swallow the cost of those expenses. So, or you might charge those onto your customers, whatever the case might be. But all of those kinds of things need to be entered into the project as well in order to get that true project profitability.
Got it. Yes, got it. So we have a question that's come up in the Q&A tab with Stephen asking, will we go over how to use projects in SuperOps? So Stephen, that's not something that we'll be doing in the webinar. We wanted to keep it just the webinar to just be informational. But if this is something that you're interested, we can definitely reach out to you tomorrow to show this over to you. Yes. So yeah. So just one more question, Chris. So, when we generally talk about projects, we talk about the MSP side of things, but it's also clients who are a part of it. So how important is it to keep clients, in the loop in this, or how important is it to keep clients informed about this?
Well, I think as with anything, even with tickets, I think it's, it's really important to keep your customers informed and up to date of what's happening. I'm a big fan of telling customers every step of the way of what I'm doing, because they need to know what's happening. And certainly on projects, and a lot of the time you can actually get your customers involved in projects. So you may have it that in the scenario I said earlier on, maybe you're going to build a server room or something, whatever it is, to you can see I had my MSP business many years ago, because I'm still talking about building server rooms and having servers and stuff on-prem, which I know doesn't happen as much anymore, but just go with me. So, you might have a server room installed, and maybe the customer's going to actually get that done themselves, right? So you could actually assign a task to a customer and say, have that customer actually being involved in that task, in that project. They have to go off and complete that and do that kind of stuff, before you can carry on with the project. So, so having your customers involved is very, very important, and keeping them informed of, any slippages or any kind of issues that might arise, especially if you're going to be putting in some kind of, internet connectivity, and, the telecoms provider digs a hole in the road and, breaks the cable. That's going to delay the entire project. You definitely want your customers to be informed throughout the entire process. And how you inform them, that's entirely up to you, and that's entirely up to how the PSA tool is allowing you to respond to that customer. So most of the time it's going to be by email, but they could log on to a portal. It could be via Slack or Teams or one of those things. But yes, very important to make sure that you always are informing your customers at every step of the way on the project.
Absolutely, absolutely. That transparency goes a long way, in enhancing the trust that our clients have on MSPs as well. And that's exactly why in the project management module in SuperOps, there's an option for MSPs where they can actually show the clients what's happening in the project and share the project with clients. So yes, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I've also seen, what I would actually do, especially if it's a, if it's a prospect and maybe you've got some kind of proposal, maybe make a copy of the Gantt chart out of the project if you can export it, or do a screenshot. Put that into your proposal as well, so that the customer can see right in the beginning, in the proposal stage, what you're proposing and how long it's going to take to do this project and all of that kind of stuff, and they can see all the steps. And then maybe have a follow-up depending on how long the project is. Maybe a couple of weeks, or a few days later, whatever the case might be, have a meeting with your customer and say, okay, this is how we're doing. This is what's happened with the first phase. We're on track for phase 2, and maybe send them a copy of that Gantt chart again. Or as you say, have some way of your customers being able to log into the portal to be able to get that information as well.
Got it. Yes, absolutely. Yes. So if you've got any questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A box or in the chat box. Yes. So,
Okay, so it doesn't look like there's any other questions.
yeah, looks like we don't have a question. But yes, yeah. If you haven't read Chris' book on PSA profitability, so I highly recommend you do. That's a great book for you to get started on the PSA side of things. And if you've got any questions later on, please feel free to send it over to us or to Chris. We'll definitely have them answered. And thank you for joining us in this session. Hope you had takeaways on what to choose between tickets and versus projects, how do you get them together and things. So hope it was really useful. Until we meet you in another session, this is Sriram signing off. Chris.
Thank you very much, Sriram. Good session, and thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris.